I'm Nicola Talent and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts. Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, if you look at him back in sort of 2017, 2016, he was at the height of his power. He seemed very untouchable. He was so feared. And now he's doing his 21 years and has just been landed before the courts again on major weapons charges.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, I mean, this guy, as we've been told, was considered bigger than Kinahan back in the mid-90s. The Criminal Assets Bureau basically forced him out of Ireland. He took a decision to get out while the going was good. And he was the top Irish criminal based in the UK, and, where he was the conduit and he was the guy who had the connections. And I suppose he was superseded then by the likes of Christy Kinahan and of course, the George Mitchell, the Penguin as well. And now he's doing his 21 years, which he got just, when was that, last year? I think he got his sentence. He's been in prison since 2017.
Yeah.
And then, of course, this whole new tranche of charges that have come out against him, I suppose, the first kind of inkling, publicly that we knew about what was coming was the arrest of Liam Byrne, his brother-in-law, in May, and his son, of course, as well, Jack Kavanagh. So now he's looking at another hefty sentence, I think, because, I mean, judging by some of the other cases involving firearms in the UK, you're talking kind of 20 plus years. So he's going to get another serious jail time.
I wonder, will he get that on top of, because what happens in the UK, they sound as if they're getting massive big sentences, but they actually get to serve 50% of it out on licence. So even though he got 21 years, he's unlikely to serve any more than 10. Now, there is a big proceeds of crime case against him, which should be coming before the courts at some point at this stage. It was launched immediately after he pleaded guilty to those conspiracy to import drugs charges, which were put to him. But that's going on. And of course, he's property out in Majorca, where in Calador, and it's part of that proceeds of crime case. What they do is they put together a sort of a bill. I mean, I think in the case of Curtis Warren, his bill was like 100 and God knows what million, but they work out how much they owe. And if they don't pay that bill, they then get another 10 years on top. So he doesn't get to serve out his second half on licence. So I wonder, does he get another one on top, or does it run at the same time, or what happens with him?
Well, we saw that with, if you remember, the TJ Carroll case, the Irish brothel keeper who ended up getting, quite a long extension because he made no effort to cooperate with the assets hearing. I think partly because quite possible some of his partners in crime had gone off with the money and he couldn't get hold of it anyway. So, I mean, it depends on whether or not he's seen as cooperating. And presumably, I suppose assets like the house in Tamworth are relatively easy to realise. They can be sold off, and that might be enough to save his skin. It depends on what kind of bill they come up with and whether they decide that he owes 10 million or 1.2 million. So I'm not sure. I haven't actually seen any of the details from that case yet. I don't know if any of it's actually been out yet.
Well, when I was over in the UK doing a documentary on him, and I was interviewing Matt Horn, who was then the deputy director of the NCA, he was able to tell me that at the time of the raids on Thomas Kavanagh's home, there was about €500,000 in assets alone taken from the drawers. I mean, there was 100 pair of designer heels. There was 36 pairs of Armani jeans. There was lines and lines of these Hugo Boss suits, these Canada Goose jackets, these handbags, designer handbags. There was £40,000 just discarded, thrown down the back of the couch and left in designer handbags. And that was that alone. And then they seized all these store cards because they were keeping their points, wherever they were buying. Like if you spend a certain amount in Brown Thomas, you get free parking and you get brought in and maybe given a glass of champagne before you spend more money. It's similar to some of the big department stores over in the UK. And I think in particular, his wife was a great spender. So they've all that sort of evidence to go through. And then they have, certainly the house, the villa in Calador is worth a big amount of money. It's right on the waterfront there in that most expensive part of Majorca. the house in Tamworth worth over £1 million, and anything else they have. But anyway, that's a bit of an aside. I mean, it's another one of his problems because he just seems to be, I mean, of all people, he's been taken apart. I mean, I know he's only facing charges as regards these firearms now, but we heard in court today that Bomber Kavanagh basically gave up some of these weapons, which were described in court as being found in the Republic of Ireland. I think they were actually found in Newry, but that it was information he gave the police. So, you know, that would sound like, is he going to fight these charges or what, you know, if he was cooperative?
Well, I know it's a favourite subject of yours, but I mean, it certainly looks like it was all information from the Encrochat
Yes.
where it came out of. And we know that from some of the stuff that came up when Liam Byrne was arrested, that it was very much, it was the NCA had managed to put together a case based on the messages that had gone between various individuals. There's two others charged along with Thomas Kavanagh, and of course Jack Kavanagh and Liam Byrne are in Spain. Presumably they're going to fight the extradition to England, where they'll presumably, it is where they're wanted for the same thing. It was the arrest warrant by the NCA, the National Crime Agency, was specifically on the same thing, and they did reference in that at the time that it was guns going to Northern Ireland, and that they were considered so big in this trade that one particular gang, I think, had something like 14 guns in a single order. So I mean, it was, you know, you can see from a policing point of view, it was a huge case. Because I mean, you know, you make a big fuss like when one gun is taken off the street. So I mean, if you're managing to intercept a professional criminal gang getting 14 delivered in a single order, it's a fairly successful day out for any law enforcement agency.
Most definitely. And they actually discussed today, I mean, there was only a short hearing in court. I just attended it remotely, along with some of the other Irish crime journalists. But during that short hearing, they talked about Encrochat, and they talked about some of the handles that were being used by the individuals involved in this conspiracy. So it was May 2021, I think, that those guns were found relating to this
the current warrants,
overall, current warrants. So, and while the barrister said they were in the Republic of Ireland, they were actually in Newry. But Encrochat was the year before, no?
It's around that time. I mean, you know, like, I mean, I suppose Bomber Kavanagh, you know, his criminal network has just really, as you said earlier, like, has been taken apart. But I mean, a lot of it goes back to that 2017 find in Greenogue, which, you know, turned up various documents, you know, as well as, you know, putting the likes of Mr. Nobody, Declan Brady, behind bars. It also really disrupted the kind of the Kinahan cartel's money laundering, but it also linked various companies and entities to Bomber Kavanagh, to the UK, which gave the National Crime Agency something to start looking into. And I think it was from that then, on top of the Encrochat information, that they really began targeting him. So of course we had the cocaine smuggling, which was brought in tarmac breaking machinery or whatever, that got him to 21 years. And then this has obviously been, you know, a parallel investigation that obviously, you know, they were waiting until the other one, or they do one at a time, and so this is the start of that now.
Well, it's interesting because the guns were found in May 2021. The Encrochat hack happened in the March to the May of 2020. But from looking at what the NCA did in the previous case against Bomber Kavanagh, which was exactly that, he was bringing in the drugs and machinery and bringing the cash back out to Belgium to pay for it. They actually found a tracker on a shipment in Dover, which allowed them then to go back and link another perceived 21 shipments to Bomber's operation. So when they put the initial case to Bomber, it was for something like 200 million euro worth of cocaine. He said he was going to plead guilty to it, but that he wasn't going to plead guilty to all that. And he successfully did a kind of a plea deal thing in the background. Now I'm using language that isn't accurate, but to bring that down to pleading guilty to 30 million euro worth of cocaine that he accepted that he brought into the country. So presumably, if they're relying on the Encrochat handles that they described in court to do with this weapons dealing, they obviously have seized a certain actual amount of weapons, but they can see the communications as regards the sale and supply of them on the Encrochat a year earlier.
Yeah, and we've seen that in various cases. I mean, they're kind of using it as, I suppose, a roadmap that they know individual A and individual B, whatever nicknames or handles they're using, and they're then basically, I suppose it's like having a map in a different language, and you just have to figure out then, what part applies to the bits that you have in terms of the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
So they've been able to slowly work it out and use that. And I suppose certainly we've seen it in the UK courts. They've managed to so far resist any challenges to that, which I think was probably why we've been kind of slow to use that evidence in Irish investigations, or not even slow, but we haven't used it at all. But it really, it's amazing to think that, this far on, like since the likes of Encrochat and Skynet and, the other kind of encrypted messaging services that have been cracked, that it just delivered up such a trove of information that I'd say, they're still working at the top layer, that there's still going to be, other people, that there's some reckoning coming down for them as well. And it's quite possible the likes of Bomber Kavanagh is going to have more charges brought against them as time goes on, certainly as more people get rolled up.
What's interesting is with Kavanagh, when I was covering the court case, the conspiracy, and he pleaded guilty, as did Gary Vickery and Daniel Canning, his co-conspirators. But, when you saw the evidence they had against him, what I found fascinating was that they got back to business so quickly. That Byrne organised crime group, headed by Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, the sort of Irish-English arm of the Kinahan cartel. And just like literally months after the death of David Byrne in the Regency Hotel, they were planning and plotting this new drug carousel, basically, to bring the drugs in and bring the weapons out. His co-conspirator, Daniel Canning, was actually hiring and renting the warehousing that they were going to be using. You could see from the evidence the NCA put to the courts that by that Christmas, along with James Jaws Byrne, the father of David Byrne, they were out celebrating in New York. Their first shipment had successfully been brought through. They were drinking and partying in New York. And then you look at this case, and it's May 2021 when these weapons are found in Newry, which are linked to Kavanagh, the charges put against him. But it was only March when he got handed down a 21-year sentence. But it just strikes me that there's no stopping this guy.
Well, it does look like if he's not cooperating, he's looking at a serious chunk of time. He is looking at another 20 plus year sentence. So I'm not sure exactly how the rules work in the UK, but it does imagine it'll affect like how quickly you get out on license, that you have, a long, serious record of, I suppose, professional criminal offending. They're going to take a different view. And like, it's amazing, like when you say, the funeral of David Byrne, you could see the way the Kinahan cartel at the time were trying to use that, I suppose, as a way of propelling themselves onto another level. There was, even just the way the whole funeral was run, the kind of the uniformed clothes that the gang members wore, like all the limousines. It was very much about power projection, and it's like they wanted to get a bit of momentum to move on. As you were saying, that there was no question of pausing business or taking stock or going to ground. It was all about let's move on. Let's use it. And of course, it was as a result of that the guards got onto Green Oak, got onto Declan Brady. So in that sense, it backfired.
Mm-hmm.
Look, it is the end of the criminal career, I think, of Bomber Kavanagh. He is. I can't see him at this stage really getting back into business. Like if there is any suggestion that he has cooperated with the NCA, like there's no chance that the Kinahans are going to deal with him anytime soon.
Well, that was stated categorically in court this morning about that. I thought it was quite amazing that was brought up at such an early point of the proceedings. But yeah, that's not going to look good from anywhere.
Well, it depends, I suppose, where he wants to spend the rest of his life. If he wants to spend it in a UK jail, or if he wants to try to organise some more comfortable arrangements, I guess he's going to have to start cooperating. And I know he obviously knows more than most people about the situation. like in terms of what's facing the Kinahans as well. So he may well have something. He may well have a serious bargaining chip, and even cooperating with the NCA on these charges might be just a demonstration of his goodwill towards the authorities and that there's something bigger coming. Or maybe not, we don't know, But I mean, I'd imagine that's the way Daniel Kinahan is thinking now. They're trying to work out, where do they go from here? And what's he going to use, or can they do anything to stop him?
Because Kavanagh would know a lot about the running of the Kinahan organisation. I mean, a hell of a lot. He was seen as Daniel Kinahan's almost right-hand man. And certainly when it came to murder here in this country after the Regency, they very much joined forces. And I think Kavanagh took on a lot of the groundwork as regards a lot of those murders. And perhaps both of them lost their key men in an attempt to kill James Mago Gately when Imre Arakas, the Estonian hitman, was flown into the country. I mean, that operation was a disaster. It not only saw the capture of Arakas, and he ended up being sent back to Lithuania to face murder charges, but it also, both of their top men, Douglas Glynn for Daniel Kinahan and Padraig Keating for Bomber Kavanagh, were both jailed along with others, very significant players in it. Because, of course, at that point in 2017, I think it was, they were frustrated by the amount of people that had been taken off the streets. They decided that between them, they'd put their top men on it and basically have no outsiders. And it came a cropper for them. But, I mean, we know that Daniel Kinahan is going to be wanted back here in Ireland, that, it's likely there may be charges brought against him. And it's just an interesting coincidence that Kavanagh, we're told, is cooperating with the police in the UK in regards to these weapons, perhaps only. But, certainly it's going to increase paranoia in the Kinahan ranks, if nothing else.
Well, it's a chink in the armour that I think any of the police in whatever jurisdiction, are working on the various cases I'm sure there is against the Kinahans. It's the chink in the armour that they've been waiting for. I'm sure they've been pushing every angle they can, whichever individuals they have. I mean, certainly, I think we mentioned this before, but when the cash, I suppose, is running out for the kind of the lower down members of the gang, that they're not getting the wages sent while they're doing their time, or the money isn't arriving back in their wife or girlfriend's house, that they're the people, to some extent, that there's I suppose an exposure from the gang's point of view about how much they can, how much they know and how much they can kind of trade for their own security in terms of trying to get out of prison or even protecting their lives. But what they know after a certain amount of time fades. I mean, it's not particularly useful after a year if they're only mid-level. The likes of Bomber Kavanagh, who has basically been a lifetime as part of this organization, who was there from day one. I mean, he was probably there before the Kinahans became the Kinahan organized crime gang. He was very much, I suppose, part of the organism that they took over and grew from.
Yeah.
And kind of grew out of. So, I mean, he's kind of the roots of the organization to some extent. So, and I mean, whatever he has, it's going to be far more useful than, these guys who, even the likes of, Declan Brady, who to some extent, while very senior, is very much a functionary. He wouldn't be as trusted. I mean, Bomber Kavanagh was the Kinahan cartel's man in the UK, and Ross Browning was their man in Ireland. I mean, and I suppose that's the sub level that any investigators want to get at. They want to get one of these guys to flip and start talking.
And there's been talk really all along about the closeness and the connection between the Byrne organised crime group and the Kinahan organised crime group, because while they were very united around that time in 2016 and almost created a blood bond between Thomas Bomber Kavanagh and Daniel Kinahan, that day they stood shoulder to shoulder at that funeral of David Byrne. There was a definite projection of power, fear, and of the coming together of the two of them in this murderous response to the Regency Hotel. But in the aftermath, as it became apparent that the Byrne organised crime group was being dismantled both here in Ireland and the UK, in Ireland by the Criminal Assets Bureau, houses were seized. I mean, they were easy to get at because they remained in these territories, whereas the Kinahans moved lock, stock and barrel out to Dubai, and they have stayed untouchable since. But after the first Regency trial, which saw Patrick Hutch be accused of the murder of David Byrne, and that trial collapsed and he was set free, acquitted of all charges. Sadie Byrne, the mother of David Byrne, did make some interesting statements in the aftermath of that court case. And along with her husband, James Byrne, they both said that they were not Kinahan, that their name was Byrne, not Kinahan. And she clearly made a distinction between the two groupings. She said that they were a family, not a cartel. And reading between the lines, you felt there was a kind of a divide at that point, which would have been 2018, 2019. In the UK, the Bomber Kavanagh's operation was very much under pressure since January 2017, when the weapons were found in Greenogue. And later he was arrested because of a stun gun in his house. And while in custody, he was taken out and told that this 300 million cocaine importation conspiracy has been put against him. I think he had a bit of a wobble at that stage and ended up in hospital. He took ill actually in prison and ended up in hospital. But around all that time, there was questions about whether or not these two groupings were still together. And obviously today's proceedings is going to kind of make us, or certainly going to suggest that gap has widened even further.
Yeah, well, just to kind of make it quite clear that, like Sadie, who you're talking about, is his mother-in-law, is Bomber's mother-in-law. Yeah. So, I mean, that's where the connection comes in there. And, I mean, look, if she's saying that, I mean, she's, quite outspoken. She's not shy about sharing her opinions. So, I mean, if she's coming out with, comments that are putting distance between them and the Kinahans, it's probably because they've been left to their own devices that, the Kinahans have moved on from street dealing. Like, we do know that the Kinahans themselves are probably more involved now in the brokering of large deals. And then the likes of Bomber Kavanagh and Ross Browning would be the people then to organise at the other end of the line, so to speak, on getting the drugs to the market. They're also involved, in money laundering, in kind of the more, I suppose you nearly call it the structural end of the drug dealing business, whether it's, trying to buy ships or aircraft or whatever to ship stuff through, Africa or through Turkey or whatever route they're going to come up with, and ways of trying to wash those billions of dollars that are going to come from all this. So I mean, they're at a different league. So I mean, when you consider, what a pointless, stupid feud that was from, from a professional drug dealing gang's point of view, that it just focused so much political and police attention on them. And, it's basically, it's the end of the Byrne family as a criminal unit. I mean, you now have one brother dead, another fighting extradition, the son-in-law, pretty much out of the game in prison, possibly doing deals with the police to try and see some kind of light at the end of the tunnel. His own son also facing, possible charges in the UK. I mean, they've nowhere to go. I mean, their cousin Fat Freddy is serving life for murder. Who else? I mean, I can't think of them all off the top of my head.
I know, because they're a huge family. They're a huge family. And they were actually, of course, they started out their criminal careers, Freddie Thompson and Liam Byrne and David Byrne, indeed, on one side of the Crumlin Drimnagh feud that Freddie headed up. They were all cousins. Liam Rowe is another cousin of theirs who isn't in jail. And Owen O'Connor is another cousin of theirs. In actual fact, during the Regency trial, Sadie Byrne's mother passed away, and the RIP notice showed that she had 13 children, 160 grandchildren, another large figure of great-grandchildren. They were a huge, huge Dublin family. And Sadie Byrne, of course, was previously a Rowe, and they were very well known street traders in around the Dublin 8 area, but they're a huge family, and obviously a very close family throughout it all. But yes, they as a unit, as a criminal organisation and as a family seem to have the greatest losses out of the wider Kinahan organisation. Whereas there's plenty of hitmen, would-be hitmen, money launderers, etc., behind bars that were working with the Kinahan organisation. It doesn't have that same family value. There's none of the Kinahans' relatives that are actually serving time or fighting cases as big as these ones the NCA are putting towards the Byrnes grouping. But yeah, I mean, the case is due up again in September, where there's going to be a kind of pre-trial hearing. And, at that point, there might be some indications of pleas. Today, certainly, when I got on, his two co-accused indicated they were pleading not guilty. I presume Kavanagh has currently indicated he's pleading not guilty. It'll come up again in September. And they were talking about a sort of a February 2024 trial for the moment, if they get as far as that, if there's no pleas.
I just remember from sitting in on some of the online hearings when Bomber was up along with Vickery and Canning, and very much kind of stoic and keeping stum, and not really showing any emotion. I presume he was doing the same today, was he?
He was, yeah. He was sitting in a place they called the lobby. Now, they're all in custody, all three. The other co-accused are a Sean Kent and a Daniel McLaughlin, who are dates of birth in the mid-1980s. So they're in their mid-30s. Kavanagh, obviously, is older than that. But the three of them are in custody, so they appeared via video link. Kavanagh was seated at a table in a thing. It was just coming up on the screen as the lobby. So I don't know, was that in the prison? Because if he was in the courts, they would have brought him into the actual courtroom. They wouldn't have left him in a lobby. So he must have been just in prison. But he sat with that usual resting sort of bad-humoured face is all I can call it. He's a very kind of square jaw, and he's a very bad-humoured man. I mean, if money made you happy, it certainly didn't work for him. Anytime I've seen him, he's like that. But he just sat and listened to the details of it, and he got up and walked out. He looks actually as if he's been working out in prison. He looks fitter than he did the last time I saw him. But then that's what people do in prison.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not going well. And sorry, I was just having a look at some of those charges that are actually against them. That they even mentioned that they had, the hollow point ammunition, a dum-dum bullet, where some of which was found. So I mean, this is pretty nasty kind of weaponry. It's it's illegal under the under the Geneva Convention. Militaries can't use them, although police can, because they what they do is they shatter inside someone's body, so they don't go through and hit another bystander, but they cause terrible wounds. So I mean that's not going to help. It's 11 firearms. So
what does a fireball firearm mean?
Say again, a fireball. I suppose that they're not they're not dummy ones. Sometimes some of the criminal gangs, they buy these guns that have been decommissioned that are then they can be reworked, and a firing pin put back in to make them workable again. So I suppose sometimes they see some of these when they know that the intention is that they're going to be used. They're going to be kind of recommissioned, so to speak. They're going to be, brought back into life.
Are they sort of semi-automatic thing that they were fired repeatedly?
Well, the semi-automatic is just every time you pull the trigger, like, right. A bullet goes. Fully automatic is when you keep your finger on the trigger, just keep shooting. So, I mean, you don't have to keep cocking the gun or reloading it to fire it. I mean, semi-automatic, virtually every gun I think that would be used now would be generally semi-automatic, apart from a shotgun.
And you see, there, Kent and Kavanagh are also charged with conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. I mean, that could literally relate to the stashing of the weapons or hiding them or whatever. Interestingly, Lee Cullen, who was a close associate of Bomber Kavanagh, who ended up in the UK, he was jailed he got about 18 years or thereabouts.
He did. He got a long stretch, all right, wasn't it?
Yeah, he was involved in weapons, but they were sort of were they coming in parts and they were putting them back together again or something? They were from France.
Yeah, that's something that there was a particular case in the UK where there was basically an underworld engineer or armourer, somebody who had basic who had basic firearm skills, like in terms of being able to repair them, and they were buying basically collectible guns that have had parts taken out or have had the barrels filled or swapped out with a lower kind of a lower quality metal, but otherwise the rest of the gun is as is. So you can actually remachine them. You can actually make the parts that are missing or been taken out and turn them back into workable weapons again.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's always been a big business in that. But at the same time, they're not entirely reliable. It depends on how good the armor is. And some of those weapons, it was actually, if I remember now, there was a gang in Birmingham, and there was a connection with some of the Limerick gangs at the time.
That's right.
Some of those weapons had ended up in Ireland. So
there's obviously a big trade in it. I mean, you can see how all the gangs are armed up now. Even just.
I mean, like I'm not sure exactly what price guns go for, but I mean, certainly in the not so distant past, they're talking about, for a 9mm Glock, it was €5,000. They might have gotten a bit cheaper now. But everything from shotguns up, there's a price on them. I mean, thankfully, it's usually the ammo is the problem, that it's harder to buy the bullets for some of these automatic weapons than it is to get the actual weapon itself. And then, of course, people store them in garden sheds or buried under a garden shed, and they're damp and don't really work properly, or don't have the same level of power as they should have if they were properly stored and cared for.
High risk trade for a little monetary value, considering the difference with cocaine. Like, I mean, firearms it's a big risk, but I suppose it gives a gang that is able to supply them a power hold, doesn't it? It's one of those items to trade that is a powerful thing to have at your disposal.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two parts to that. One of it is that, yeah, it gives you a bit of, I suppose, willy waving like power as a gang. You see it at the lower level. Like, there's even one or two videos out this week of two factions having a row over something fairly minor, and they're showing off an automatic handgun and something that looks like a Mac-10, and showing that they have a full magazine of bullets as well. And then there's other people who are just obsessed with guns. I mean, there is something about it, like that some young men and not so young men are actually just obsessed with them,
mm-hmm.
and would do it anyway, even if they weren't necessarily involved in a criminal gang. They would be kind of secretly trying to collect firearms for whatever reason. It's just it's something people like. I mean, you saw that with one of the Colopes who ended up shooting himself in the head, showing off. I mean, he was basically a gun nut, and he was to some extent where a lot of power that faction had at the time was that they knew that he was the guy who had a cache of weapons hidden that he'd spent a lot of time and effort collecting up bits and pieces, and then of course wasn't so great at handling and managed to shoot himself in the head while showing off at a party.
Yes, that was a very unfortunate incident. Brian Colopy, I think that was. Is that right?
No, I think it's Philip, actually.
Philip Price, yeah. Okay.
Brian is still alive, having recently served a recent sentence for heroin possession.
Well, listen, we'll keep an eye on this next hearing from the Kavanagh and others charged with these weapons and this NCA proceedings, and I suppose we'll see if we hear any more on the grapevine as regards to how the revelations from the court today might be affecting the Kinahans' humour. Eamon Dillon, thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you, Nicola. Talk to you soon.